Hi everyone, Alan here with our weekly Discovering Buddhism class. I hope you're well, I hope you're there, I hope you can hear me, I hope we can stay connected tonight and no technical problems like we had last week. Apologies for that. It's the NBN, I've been told, and the peak hour. So tonight, if there's any new people, I put my, basically Discovering Buddhism is a course presented by a group called FPMT, a worldwide group of teaching centres, and the one in Sydney is called Vajrayana Institute in Ashfield. Check the website, and this subject is like an intermediate introductory course to Buddhism, and I'm fortunately been given the job of teaching it. So my qualifications are very sparse. I'm just really an old student, and been around Tibetan Buddhism since the early 80s, and at Vajrayana Institute since it was started in the early 80s. And I'm a student of, not a teacher, but a student of Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa, who are the founders, the spiritual founders of this organization, both Tibetan monks, and they came to the West to teach Westerners, because Westerners in those days were traveling to the East looking for different spiritual traditions. It was probably the hippie era, 60s and 70s. And so these monks, unlike many Tibetan monks, had an interest in teaching Westerners. And so they responded to the request, and they set up a monastery in Nepal. Both Lama Yeshe, they were both refugees, but Lama Yeshe was the real refugee from Tibet. Lama Zopa was actually born in Nepal and travelled to Tibet. But anyway, they're the founding members, the founding spiritual fathers of our group. Lama Yeshe passed away in the early 80s, and Lama Zopa is now carrying on the organization as the spiritual head. So that's the short story, and what we do tonight, we're starting a new group and a new module. The new module is called the Spiritual Teacher, and this is the fourth subject in the course, which spans 13 subjects. Is it 13 or 14? And each topic is covered in about 1 month, and so it takes about a year or more with the holidays and so on to cover the whole course. And we just have this one class a week. At the moment, it's only online, YouTube, but hopefully next year we'll be able to start live classes in Ashfield, if there's a demand. And we'll probably also keep teaching online courses, because they seem to be quite popular. So, as we always do, is to start the class with a 5-minute mindfulness meditation to calm ourselves down after the day. And it's just basically watching the breath. Very simple practice. And it's one that is used often in Western medicine nowadays, Western psychiatry, Western psychology, taken from the East. And mindfulness meditation, breath meditation existed even before Buddhism. And so it's not exclusive to Buddhism, but it's definitely part of Buddhist meditation. So all we're doing is watching the breath coming and going. We're not... Thank you, Stacey. Great to say. Anyone who wants to say hello, feel free. There's a chat column there, or there should be, if you'd like to make a comment, say hello, or even ask a question. So, where was I? Introducing breath meditation. Yes, so it's just 5 minutes without too much instruction. You can be sitting, you can be lying down, you can be in a chair or cross-legged. Main thing is the back is straight, because that helps the flow of energies in the body, and the eyes can be closed or open. And then what we do is just give our attention to the coming and going of the breath, which is happening there all the time, as long as we're alive. But we're just going to notice it without having to comment or decide whether it's a good breath or bad breath or uneven, whatever. We notice it, and then we just leave it there. There will, of course, be distractions. The mind will get bored, but that's all part of the practice. The other part of the practice, apart from staying on the breath, is to check, like a monitor, like a spy, to see what we're doing, whether on the breath or have we wandered off. And when we notice we've wandered off, the sooner we do notice that, we just let go that distracting thought and come back to the breath. That might take a few minutes, or could take some time to even notice that we've actually lost the breath, lost the object. But just take as it comes, accept the mind as it is, and that's the practice. All right, get comfortable. Okay, so we're just now getting ourselves physically in a good posture, relaxed. Time to bring our attention into our inner world, feeling what our body is doing, also feeling what our mind is doing, letting go of the external busy day we've just had. Feeling that we're just, for this 1 hour, hour and a half, bringing our attention inwards, and appreciating this incredible opportunity we have to study the teachings of the Buddha and to do some practice. On the path to enlightenment. Making sure our spine is straight, shoulders relaxed. Feeling the weight of the body on the chair or the floor. We can use the out breath to breathe out physical stress in the body, that we feel we're relaxed with each out breath. And now we just give our whole attention to the gentle rhythm of the breath in the body, the movement of the body as the breath comes and goes. Remember, the second part of the practice is to monitor what's happening, being alert when the mind leaves the breath. noticing that. Gently letting go of the thought, just a thought. Patiently coming back to the breath. Can we do one full in-breath, one full out-breath without being distracted? Okay, so just let's have a quick look at the notes I sent out, I think, yesterday. Hopefully you've got them. Again, if there's any new people who are watching or watching the video and want to join the group, just send me an email to the column there, and I'll put you on the email list. Get the notes every week. So there was the usual readings, but which are mostly from, I think, mostly or all from Lama Zopa Rinpoche. They're extracts from Lama Zopa's teaching. Then there is a larger collection by Venerable Connie Miller, Constant Miller, called Teachings and Meditation. So this is just a transcript of what Connie taught when she was teaching this subject in Discovering Buddhism, probably some years ago, quite some years ago. She taught it over 6 weeks, you'll notice. So she had quite a lot more time than we do. And so it is longer and more detailed. There are some good meditations in it. And so we'll use one of those tonight. So that's a good thing to have. So these are supplied. So if you could just, if you've got it there, have a look at the module outline. It's called the topic outline. And so it's just a one-page with what's going to happen each week, roughly. We don't always stick to the menu exactly. So 4 different weeks with 4 separate topics. And then the reading list, which I've just been talking about. So as far as the recommended reading goes, there's that then there's an important book, a really good book, called The Heart of the Path by Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Heart of the Path is one of Lama Zopa's really primary books. It's a collection of all his teachings on this topic of the spiritual teacher, the importance of having a spiritual teacher in Buddhism, a Heart of the Path. So if you can get it, or if you've got it, it's a good one. It's quite a long book, but it's a really good, extensive, detailed coverage of the topic, more detailed than we do cover in Discovering Buddhism, but a great book to have on the bookshelf. And the next one on the list is The Foundation of Buddhist Practice by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Tupten Choden, who is like an assistant to His Holiness the Dalai Lama in writing these books, a collection of teachings on the Lam Rim. Remember, the Lam Rim is are the basic Buddhist teachings. And these books are they're still coming out. There are a series of books that started coming out probably about 3 or 4 years ago, which are specifically written for Westerners by the Dalai Lama. So this is an early, I think there's 5 volumes at the moment, and this is the second volume. That's excellent, but you don't need to buy it. It's quite, or you could probably get it online in digital form, they're quite reasonable, maybe $15, perhaps $20 for the Kindle or the digital version. That's good, but it's very detailed. Practicing the Path, Yangtze Rinpoche, that's sort of almost like the textbook for the course because it covers the whole course in a fairly condensed textbook. It's the whole of the Lam Rim Path, taught by Yangtze Rinpoche, who's a Tibetan living in America, teaching Americans basic introduction to Buddhism at one of the centers in America, one of the FPMT centers. Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand is a classic text, a Tibetan text taught by Pabonka Rinpoche, a great Lama from last century, who was one of the last surviving great lamas before Tibet fell in the mid-last century to the Chinese. And so that book is like an important text, but it is written for monastics who are living in Tibet. The last one on the list is called Relating to a Spiritual Teacher by Alex Berzin. Alex Berzin, a Western teacher, one of the first Westerners to go to India and receive teachings from the Dalai Lama in the 50s or probably 60s, I think. Would have been the 60s because the Dalai Lama didn't come until 59. So it would have been late 60s, early 70s. So there's an extract from his book about spiritual teachers and gurus, and I'll circulate that later. I haven't handed it out yet, but it's just an extract, very helpful. So that's for the reading list. So now let's have a look at tonight. So tonight, basically introduction, some terminology, and then we look at how the idea of a spiritual teacher fits into our Western culture. Is there any equivalent? And then how important it is to make progress, to have, not immediately, but eventually have a spiritual teacher to help us with our practice and our progress, and how to choose one, how to find one, and so on. Well, it's not kind of a foolproof guide, but these are just some things that are taught in the teaching, the Lam Rim teachings, of what to look for, what to avoid on the topic of spiritual teachers. So one interesting thing that the Dalai Lama points out when he's teaching this topic is that if this was in Tibet, this topic would definitely be number one, the first topic that you teach in a course like this, because it is probably the most important topic, and everybody in Tibet is familiar with the idea of spiritual teachers. Remember that Dharma teachings like this are really only taught in monasteries in Tibet. The average Tibetan herding yaks and living a simple life doesn't get to go to a centre and listen to teaching. They're busy surviving, and if there's a important occasion, wedding or funeral or something, then they go to the monasteries, and the monks come and do the practices for the everyday people. And so they're like the repository of knowledge of the Dharma, of Tibetan teachings. And so that's the traditional way in Tibet. So if the teachings were Lamrim teachings being given in a monastery, so this would be the first topic. And but now we're in the West, and these teachings only in the last 50 years have actually traveled from Tibet, the East, to Tibet, as when the Dalai Lama went into exile, became a refugee, and set up residence in India. And then all the monks, or not all, but a large number of monks, went into exile, became refugees, following the Dalai Lama. Now, some of those monks just were eventually established in refugee camps at first, very, very, very difficult conditions. They put them in hot areas in North India, a place called Buxa, which used to be a prisoner, like a concentration camp for prisoners during the British Raj. And many of them died from diseases and the heat stress and so on. So it was a horrendous time in the early days after the refugees, the monks came into exile. And then eventually they set up, the Indian government gave land to the Tibetan refugees through His Holiness, land that wasn't wanted by the Indians, so in quite barren, difficult places. And the Tibetans were sent, and they set up monasteries there. Eventually they had to clear the land, and then they had to, the beginning they had to grow their own crops, and then eventually slowly over the decades the monasteries were formed to replicate the monasteries that used to be in Tibet. Sarah J, Sarah May, there were these great monasteries in Tibet that they set up, not exactly the equivalent, but the same monasteries with the same names, to be able to train young Tibetan monks and nuns as they came up through the life that they're leading in India. So this story is just, the main point is to point out that as these, many of those, not many, but Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe, probably just a few of the monks who came into exile from Tibet were interested in going to the West, and they were receptive to Western culture and also to making contact with Westerners. It was also happened to be the time when Westerners were very interested in Eastern religions, me being one of them, and it was the hippie era. I don't think I was a hippie, but I was very interested in some sort of alternative to the very rather what to me was quite a constricted spiritual religious upbringing, going to a religious school here, and then just maybe if you're interested you could go to church, but there wasn't really much emphasis, certainly in my upbringing, on having any sort of spiritual life. So some of us who wanted to some alternatives, I mean, some people just wanted to go and explore another culture, maybe have some dope and a few drugs or something, get away from the very constricted upbringing that some of us had in the 50s. And then go to, so we ended up sometimes in India, Nepal, and fortunately for me and for some others, particularly Australians, some British, some European, and some American, met some of these great lamas who were in exile, these Tibetans, who happened to be receptive and open to give teachings to Westerners, Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe, these unique Tibetan monks who were in India as refugees, and they happened to come across one particular student who was a Russian tourist. She was actually part of the Russian royal family, lost everything during the revolution, or not her herself, but her family went into exile during the Russian Revolution, the early 1900s, and quite wealthy. And she happened to come across, her name was Zina. Zina came across both Lamas Yeshe and Lama Zopa living in northern India in a place called Darjeeling. And she wanted to, just happened to be living in the same little town as Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa, who'd actually left their the very oppressive and difficult situation they were in Buxa, northern India. And so they went up to northern India where it was cooler. I think it was partly because Lama Zopa had tuberculosis. And so they recommended he go up into the hills where it was cooler and less humid. And he was trying to get back to good health up there. And he'd already met Lama Yeshe and in the same Buxa concentration refugee camp. And they'd form a bond, a very strong bond. They hadn't known each other before. And it's a very interesting story, actually, because Lama Zopa was a reincarnated Lama called Lama Zopa Rinpoche. They used the word Rinpoche to refer to the fact that the person is recognized as being a new incarnation of a previous Lama. So Lama Zopa is recognized as the incarnation of what they call the Laudo Lama, a very revered monk who lived way up in the Himalayas in Nepal on the border of Tibet, called Laudo, and had been a great meditator in a cave up there. So he's recognized as a reincarnation of a great previous Lama. So he was in Tibet, or he ended up in the same refugee camp as Lama Zopa, as Lama Yeshe, and Lama Yeshe had come straight from Tibet. He was a very high monk, but he was thought to be the incarnation of an abbess, a woman nun who was in charge of an abbey in Tibet. So anyway, there was an interesting story when one of Lama Zopa's friends, I think Lama Zopa was very young, said there was a wonderful Lama who he should meet, who lives just outside the refugee camp. And Lama Zopa somehow was very reluctant. He had a feeling like a premonition that this was a very important person, but so he didn't really quite know what to expect. So there was sort of a reluctance to meet this person, which was Lama Yeshe. And so eventually the friend almost dragged him along and said, "You must meet this person." And he bought a little packet of biscuits, which is a traditional offering or something you're supposed to, if you're going to meet a teacher, someone who might be a teacher for you, the tradition is to take a gift. So he didn't have anything and he felt really inadequate, didn't want to go, but he bought a little packet of biscuits at the shop and then went to meet Lama Yeshe. And there was an incredible connection. And from that time on, Lama Yeshe started to give teaching to Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And Lama Zopa Rinpoche recognized Lama Yeshe as his teacher, one of his teachers, and the teacher that he would eventually start teaching Westerners. So when they were in Darjeeling, coming back to Darjeeling, where Zena was, they would just arrived, and this rather strange Russian woman, because remember Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe didn't speak much English, virtually none. Lama Zopa was trying to learn, he was having lessons. And then Zena came, knocked on the door and asked if they could give teachings. Lama Zopa was quite interested and asked Lama Yeshe, and Lama Yeshe said, yes, if you think it will help, you can give teachings. Lama Yeshe was just not coming forward at that stage to teach. And so over a number of days, weeks and months, Zena became a regular visitor in this little house in Darjeeling where Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe lived, and received teachings on a fairly regular basis. And eventually, Zena had more money than the monks had, so she actually had quite a big house, and she invited the two monks to come and live in part of her house separately, of course. And so she became their very first student, Western student. And from then, she brought her friends. Some of them were interested, and so this practice of teaching Lama Yeshe started to teach as well. And Zena and other Westerners who came in contact with Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa moved to Nepal and eventually bought some land just outside Kathmandu, where they set up the monastery called Kopan Monastery. It's just where the centre, where that it's like the base for Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and where he's still actually living and still teaching online during the pandemic. So I'm just telling you that story because it's kind of an example of a guru-disciple relationship. Of course, a very unusual one, not the one where this is Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa, but it also explains how the Westerners became students of Tibetan Buddhism, Tibetan Dharma, in this particular type school of Buddhism, Gelugpa, with these two teachers. Now, at the same time, over different parts of India and also in the West, there were other Tibetan monks who were teaching Westerners. Some of them had gone to Switzerland, but at that stage, there was no teachers in Australia. So these Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa during the 70s and up into the early 80s started teaching regularly Westerners who came through the monastery at Kopan and set up an annual Kopan course, which is still held every year for a couple of hundred Westerners. Okay, let's go back now to the summary or the notes, page 1. Just where it says misconception, the notes from Venerable Connie, she talks about how if you try to think about what does guru devotion mean in most Westerners' minds, if they're not really familiar with Buddhism or meditation, they could think it's kind of a cult to have a guru or to revere a teacher. There's really nothing like it in our Judeo-Christian culture. And she mentions the very strange cult called the Jonestown massacre that happened in the 70s. Probably you wouldn't remember unless you're as old as me. But so it was just a preacher from America, fanatical, who managed to have a following and could manipulate them. And the students took several hundred of his students to a kind of remote camp in South America, yeah, in Jonestown, which I think it was in a place called Guyana. And these people, he convinced them that the end of the world was going to happen. They had to commit suicide. And so he gave them all poison, and there was a kind of a massacre, a suicide massacre. So this has happened, of course, in other times and places in history. There are these extreme groups where somebody sets up kind of a cult or a new religion, and then people are manipulated, and sometimes their money is taken, and sometimes in extreme cases they're actually persuaded to kill themselves, which is very sad. So this has nothing to do with the idea of guru devotion. So there really isn't anything in our spiritual Western world, except perhaps not in spiritual Western world, but there's the idea of people who are teachers, who help us. First of all, there are teachers who help us with our parents, of course, the basic things of how to survive in the world comes from our parents. And then there's those who give us their schooling, education. Some of those teachers, all they're doing, they're not the equivalent or anything quite like the spiritual teacher in Tibetan Buddhism. But they're people who, without that sort of title, but there might be people who helped us in a very deep way, give us special support, teacher who's encouraged us to exploit our talents, given us confidence if we've needed it. It could also be a relative or whatever. So the point is that there are people that help us along the way in our life to learn things, and without which we really couldn't manage in the early days, and then we couldn't have a secular education without teachers. So also very good little bit of advice from His Holiness the Dalai Lama is that the reason he thinks it's better not to teach this topic right at the beginning of an introductory Buddhist course, because he says the better for Westerners to first make contact with the Buddhist teachings and see whether there's something there that interests them, that resonates, and then they can decide whether to explore the actual teaching. And from then, if they want to keep going and they've got a basic understanding of, say, the Four Noble Truths, the importance of renunciation and so on, then they can study this topic called the spiritual teacher, guru devotion. So the first thing is to make contact with the truth of teaching, feel that these true teachings are something that reflect our own inner wisdom, and that we want to follow it up, look into it more deeply, and then we can want to make a connection with the spiritual teacher at a deeper level. So with this actual topic, the advice is also from the textbooks or from the transcript as well, is to keep an open mind, because when we're studying this topic, there are new ideas, and sometimes they may seem quite difficult, but keep an open mind. Remember the three pots: the pot that has to be upright and not turned over to receive what's going into it. So the mind has to be open to receive new ideas. Also has to be clean. The pot has to be clean. That means not polluted or stained by some other ideas that are going to interfere with considering the pros and cons of this new idea. If we're going to be biased from our previous ideas, that doesn't help. So time's skipping away. So I think the terminology you just touch on, the word guru means something of substantial weight, and we're talking about, of course, weight in terms of having knowledge and having some qualities. The word lama, and I actually hadn't realized this until I studied this topic, that lama meant, la means unsurpassable, and ma has mother connotations, so unsurpassable mother, which is really, I was just thinking with lama. Lama's most common name, Lama is Yeshe's most common name amongst Westerners, is just Lama. And he had this mother quality, so it was a very appropriate name for Lama Yeshe. So His Holiness says, another dispelling in case there's wrong ideas, he says the actual terms Lama and Guru, so in these, the idea of spiritual teacher doesn't evoke someone who's being a living Buddha. It's different to being a living Buddha in the normal context. It means somebody who has got these qualities that are better than ours. So to have someone who we regard as a teacher, they obviously have to have qualities that are better than ours. Otherwise, there's no point in following them and following the teachings and so on. So they have superior qualities in comparison to their followers, that superior, such as things as compassion, understanding, patience, wisdom, and so on, and the ability to understand the teachings. So, but there is this other meaning of guru, which only applies in Tantra. So we won't go into it in much detail at the moment, maybe later weeks, where the word guru, the word guru devotion, implies that seeing the teacher as the Buddha. So that's a very unusual situation where we need to actually see the guru as the Buddha to be able to make progress in tantric study or tantric practice. We'll leave that for now, but generally the word guru refers to the person having superior quality, not being a living Buddha. The word Rinpoche I mentioned, and Tulku refers to reincarnated monks, and the word Geshe applies to people who, ordained monks who have studied great detail at monasteries and obtained a degree called a Geshe degree, which can take, I believe, around about 15 years, depending on how high the degree is, 15 or more years of solid study from the time the monks are very young. And they can do this, of course, in the monasteries in southern India now. They used to do it in Tibet. And so it's a very, it's like a doctorate, but more than a doctorate. Doctorate, I think you can get here in 6 years. This one, it's the highest academic degree that one can get in the Tibetan hierarchy. Unfortunately, just as a side note, our wonderful Geshe at Vajrayana Institute, who teaches twice a week, is what they call a Lamrampa Geshe, the highest qualified Geshe that is possible, who did his studies in southern India. And he's our full-time resident teacher, Tibetan teacher, in Vajrayana Institute. So just a little bit more about what happened traditionally in Tibet. Teachers would remember all the Tibet that happened all the Buddhism that happened was taught by monastics monks and lamas and so on in the monasteries, and so there was this close community, and so people could, if young started usually at the age of 5, 6, 7, or 8 years old, and so from that young age they were living in this monastic community, and so they got to know teachers, and they could see as they grew up which teachers they respected and had a connection with, and so there was, if they felt that there was connection, they wanted to learn more from that teacher, then they could request to become that person's student. So it all happened within the monastic community. Just looking at Lama Yeshe's teaching to Westerners about what a guru is in the Western context, he said, quote, this is at the top of page 2, a qualified guru is someone who has gained mastery over his own mind and who understands the psyche of the disciples and have the psychological means and methods to guide the disciple on the blissful path to liberation and enlightenment. So very profound teaching there from Lama Yeshe. The teacher has control over his own mind and understands the minds of others and what they need to help them on the path to enlightenment. But this is, of course, the qualified guru, the one who's able to lead others to full enlightenment. So, if we're lucky enough to find such a person, then and to also realize that, then we should follow that person after we check out, of course, all their qualities and all the benefits that follow from following them. So, just to help us, particularly new people, if they people who haven't made a connection, that's fine, with a particular teacher. When listening to teachers, teachings about spiritual teachings and so on, and this where we have to sort of do a visualization or imagine our teacher or something, it's recommended that we use an image of the Buddha, because most of us would have some reverence or respect for the Buddha and his teaching. So, as a symbol of the teacher, the Sangha, the teacher, we can visualize or imagine the Buddha. And so, and then as things progress, we might find along the way during our studies, practice, that we meet somebody who we have a connection with, and we check them out very carefully and find we want to be their student, then we can devote ourselves to that student, to that person. And it is possible to have more than one teacher. We'll talk about that later. Usually there's what they call a root guru, who's our most important teacher. But then we can have if we receive teachings from people who we respect, and there are so many now, we're so lucky to have His Holiness the Dalai Lama teaching regularly online. We have other great masters through the internet and so on available. And we also have Western teachers who've spent their whole life studying the Dharma and are able to use the the English language so skillfully to be able to communicate and teach. So it's possible, particularly with communications now, to have more than one teacher. So just on the notes, just roughly looking at where we're up to, we're going to do the meditation at the end of the class fairly soon, because I've got this fear that we're going to be dropped out by YouTube or by the NBN. I'm getting a little message up on the screen saying my connection is unstable. So I'm going to try and be able to do the meditation, which will be on the importance of having a teacher. So preliminary meditation where we remind ourselves how useful it is, or how impossible our life would be if we actually hadn't had people right from birth to teach us basically our daily skills, and then later on our secular education and so on. The importance of having a teacher. So so as Connie Miller says in her transcript, there's no urgency. There is this like a traditional view in Tibetan Buddhism, and the teacher will arrive when the student is ready. The teacher will appear. So it involves an idea that when it's kind of there's some karma involved, there's the conditions which may not be completely obvious to us. When our mind is ready, then the teacher will somehow appear. It's a bit like, the karma, when karma ripens. The expression of karma ripens means if we've created the causes for, say, something positive, say to meet our partner in life, then that person will appear. And so we can use that sort of everyday example of how this saying, when a student is ready, the teacher will appear. Now that's a way of, it can be taken many ways. It can be the actual teacher who is going to impart the Dharma, and perhaps give us teachings, perhaps give us initiations and transmissions, empowerments, and so on. It could also mean the life itself as a teacher can also happen, so that as it says, Connie says, every event and even ordinary people can be our gurus. So that's like a profound way of looking at when things go wrong, we might be able to, that person who seems to be causing a problem for us could in fact be our teacher, teaching us patience and the qualities of tolerance and forbearance and so on. Now, just having some notes at the bottom, page 3 and over, that his Dalai Lama gives us some good advice for Westerners. He says that if you're looking for a teacher and there seems you find some set of teachings, you might find some live teaching, a book, or someone who seems to be competent and perhaps could be a potential teacher. He says the best thing to do at the beginning is to treat that person like a university professor, or to somebody who has more knowledge than you that you can learn from. And from there, just see if that person has not just the required knowledge, but has these other qualities that are required. Remembering that this spiritual teacher is not just teaching you the facts that you need for a university degree to pass the exams and so on. So the spiritual teacher is actually teaching you the tools of life, not secular life, but how to progress spiritually in our spiritual life, and how to not just become a better person, but increase our wisdom and our compassion and progress along the path to full enlightenment. So as a beginning, he says this can be like a way of checking, and then from there gradually, if while we're getting teachings, we can ask other people what they think of this person. We can maybe start reading books of that person. Then we can actually just check out some history, the background of this teacher who seems to be good. And slowly, gradually, we can put together many different sources of evidence that this person seems to. In the back of our mind, we have the teachings on how to find the qualities of desirable qualities of a good spiritual teacher, and so we can check them out using our inner wisdom particularly. And so he also, in that little group of notes there, there's some difference, how different spiritual teachers are in the sense that they don't charge it, whereas the secular teacher or the counsellor, we can also bring in psychologists, counsellors, psychiatrists, how different they are to a person's going to teach us Buddhist teachings and Dharma and how to understand our mind and refine our mind and work with our mind. So there's quite a few interesting comparisons. Won't have time to go into them now, but there's I think Alex Burson has written some articles about comparing the psychiatrists and so on to the role of a spiritual teacher, particularly that psychiatrist is not trying to lead us out of all suffering to enlightenment. Then probably they may be like doctors trying to improve an illness. They will charge usually, very different to usually a spiritual teacher. And so there's no particular interest in that person's life outside the professional relationship. So also an interesting comparison to the spiritual teacher. Okay, so I think it would be a good time, in case there are any problems with our connection, to just move to our, just a quick look at the end of the notes there. We're going to next week start on how to investigate a spiritual teacher's qualities, and how important it is to check, not rush in, and some of the things that we're looking for. So I might just introduce a few of those topics. There's actually in the teachings 10 things that we're told to look for when we're looking for a spiritual teacher. I might just have a quick look at some of those when we do the meditation. So the meditation, the topic is why we need a spiritual guide. So actually in this guided meditation, we start off with how important it is to have a non-spiritual guide, a secular guide, starting from the basic skills from birth, we get from our parents, moving through to our education, moving through to our experiences, perhaps even people who may have helped us to overcome certain obstacles in our lives, not necessarily spiritual teachers, but just friends, close relatives, and so on. And then we look at if we need help with even just getting a basic education, even overcoming some of life's obstacles, how much more important it is to have a teacher if we're actually looking for a way out of all our problems, how we can actually obtain liberation from all suffering forever, which is what is offered with nirvana, the Buddhist teachings. So that helps just to convince us there is a role to be played by a spiritual teacher in our study and practice. And then we just look at some of these, and then there's other examples of even if we go to another country, We need a guidebook. We've never left Australia and we go to somewhere that's completely foreign, culture and language and so on. First thing we need is a guidebook and a reliable guide to actually find our way, even out of the airport and find the hotel and find things like that. But these kind of mundane examples are often used to form a very basic example of how we need guides. Okay. All right, so just get comfortable, and we probably spend about 10 or 15 minutes on this meditation. We will probably finish a bit early tonight, but my main aim is to finish before we get cut off. And I'm still getting this very worrying notice that says my connection is unstable. So just find a comfortable position, sitting down or lying. And we'll start the practice. So we begin, as always, with a few moments coming to the breath, mindfulness of the breath, checking our posture, our body, our comfortable position, our mind's alert, back straight. The whole idea of this guided meditation is to produce some reasons and convince us that we have a need of a spiritual guide in our practice and study of great Buddhist teachings. So we begin our practice, first of all, bringing to mind examples of how we need someone to teach us in everyday life. The secular things we need to know, beginning with our parents, the time we were born, how to eat our food, how to avoid danger, how to keep ourselves clean, how to dress ourselves. Our secular education, we start to go to school, we learn alphabet, said to be a very important stage in our secular and spiritual education, said to be a very important stage in our secular and spiritual educations when we learn the alphabet. The person who teaches us the alphabet is said to be one of our first teachers, spiritual teachers, because through the alphabet we can learn the Dharma, the Buddha's teachings. We can learn to read. From that teacher, we learn primary education, secondary education, tertiary. We're lucky and interesting. We also, along the way, there'll be somebody who teaches us sport, how to exercise, things we enjoy doing, recreational activities. The arts, how to enjoy music. Other arts, fine arts, works of art, drama, architecture. And then when we start to work, we need someone to teach us the practical aspects of our job, hands-on skills. Even a doctor, a lawyer, architect needs these practical skills, usually taught by another person, another teacher, a person who's there offering their expertise, their guidance, their experience to transmit to us their experience and their expertise. So important. Also thinking any special teachers who've offered us more than just the required help. Could have been a special teacher at high school, primary school, who encouraged us, helped us overcome perhaps some psychological problems or shyness, helped us to believe in ourselves, give us confidence, self-confidence, so important in our upbringing, our education. Through their own compassion, loving kindness, they've offered us extra help. Generate a sense of gratitude, appreciation towards these people that they've shown us, our upbringing. Now, given the importance of teachers in all these activities that are non-spiritual, important for our upbringing, how much more important is it to have a teacher to teach us the Dharma path, the path to the development of our mind, the development of our mind, our qualities of compassion, loving kindness, our qualities of wisdom, understanding. Wisdom that can actually lead us out of samsara, out of the suffering that we have learned exists in our life from the Four Noble Truths, the First Noble Truth of suffering. Having realized our situation, we now appreciate how important it is just to have someone lead us along the path. We learn our situation, our mind. We are in a state of, it's like a patient, ill, wanting to have the medicine. We need the doctor to just prescribe what medicine we should take. For our specific mental makeup, our specific dispositions, karmic dispositions. A spiritual teacher will see exactly what the problem is for us and what the solution is, what practice we should do. what practice we should do. We're entering a territory we have never been before, the mind. And we need a guide along the way. Each Vajrayana guy has experience and gone before along the path, the Dharma path to liberation. Those at least knows more than we do and is making progress along that path. Feel how important that is for that teacher to be qualified to help us. What kind of spiritual teacher should we be looking for? What qualities should we be looking for? According to the scriptures and the teachings, these are some of the qualities that we should be looking for. Spiritual teacher should have a mind subdued through the practice of ethics and morality. Trained person has trained in what action to adopt and what actions to avoid. Adopting what will help and abandoning what will harm. You also need a mind that's pacified by good concentration, a higher training of concentration where the mind can be focused on one point so that they can absorb the teachings with a clear mind. Also, using that concentration mind to pacify the mind through wisdom, the training of wisdom, understanding how things exist, including ourselves. So this person who's going to be our teacher needs more qualities than the student, more knowledge than the student, more wisdom than the student. Also needs perseverance, enthusiasm and perseverance in teaching the Dharma, even when conditions are difficult. And skill in teaching even difficult students who are hard to teach, and doesn't lose patience with the teacher. Doesn't feel discouraged if the student doesn't understand immediately. Is patient. A patient teacher, a teacher that will persevere. According to the level of the student. Another important quality is to have motivation to teach out of loving kindness. Loving kindness, compassion for the student, said to be an important quality of the teacher. So these are some of the qualities that we need to find in our spiritual teacher when we find a spiritual teacher. So from there we generate an enthusiastic wish to find a qualified spiritual guide by opening our heart and checking with our wisdom, our inner wisdom eye. And feel confidence and joy that we will find this precious friend, spiritual friend, virtuous friend, to accompany and guide us. When the time is right. Contemplate it. Stay with that thought of confidence that we will find the teacher. Feel that this will definitely happen. Work to create the causes for this to happen. Meet the spiritual guide. Follow the spiritual guide and make progress on the path to liberation. So then we can just dedicate from this wish and this guided meditation that due to the merits, the positive imprints we've made on our mind from this practice and from all the practices done in the past, we'll do in the future, may I and all other beings find the perfectly qualified spiritual guide. And in this and all future lives, may we never be separated from our spiritual guide, from the pure Dharma teachings. May all our precious teachers have long and healthy lives, and may all their compassionate projects for all living beings succeed perfectly without any obstacles. Finally, I'll just read Lama Zopa's special prayer for the pandemic. However many sick sentient beings there are, may they quickly be freed of all sickness. May all sickness, without exception, of all transmigrating beings never occur again. May the Buddha Dharma last for a long time. May all sentient beings in this world meet the Buddha Dharma and achieve enlightenment as quickly as possible. Dedicating to that.